I remember back during the early to mid 3DS era, I used to play whatever tiny indie game or virtual console game I could buy with a small amount of money I could make weekly from chores and such. A few of those games I would play would go on to be some of my favorite childhood games. I have a soft spot for some of them, of course. Laser Striker Gunvolt, 1001 Spikes, and of course the topic of today's video is Cave Story. Cave Story is the original breakout indie game hit. A lot of people kind of nowadays pretend like it doesn't exist, which is a real shame because the game is pretty good. It's really good actually. I'd even say it's amazing. For, the fact that it was made by one guy. I would say Cave Story is one of the only truly indie games. It was originally released December 20th, 2004 by a single person. Yeah, that's pretty wacky, huh? Developed by a single person. The plot of Cave Story is surprisingly dark. It takes place on a floating island after some war that happened. You play as, quote, an amnesiac android dude who's an armed scouting robot. He's the definition of a silent protagonist, is just talked to pretty much the entire time. Very shortly after stealing the Polar Star from a gunsmith, you arrive at Mimiga Village, a village lived in by a race of creatures known as Mimiga, these weird bunny-looking guys. Here you meet a few of them, Toroko and King, who are arguing over a key to a house owned by a Mimiga known as Arthur, who is a hero to the town. He was killed by a man known only as the Doctor. The Doctor's taken power of an artifact known as the Demon Crown, which gives him access to several abilities, as well as the service of a robot named Balrog and a witch named Misery. He seeks to use the red flowers, which make Mimiga go rabid, because he wants to raise an army to rule over the surface. After learning this, you go to Sand Zone. After learning about it, Quote ends up going to a place on the island known as Sand Zone, where a warehouse full of red flowers are. You meet Curly Brace, another more talkative robot. Also, I want to mention their names are a programming joke, haha! After going into the wall and getting a very important item, we go help collect dogs for Jinka, an old woman who has the keys to the place holding these red flowers. However, upon bringing Jinka the last dog, Quote finds that the Doctor, Balrog, and Misery have stolen the key from Jinka and have gone to the warehouse. Once there, Misery and Balrog force Toriko to eat the red flowers, making him go rabid. King shows up in the middle of the fight, but unfortunately he is unable to stop Toriko from being turned into a monster, which Quote has the kill. Upon Toriko's death, King gives his blade to Quote and requests him to avenge him, dying right in front of Quote. This is what I meant when I said Cave Story is a bit darker than you may remember. But we're going to take a break from plot stuff to talk about some aspects that I like about the gameplay. Cave Story is a game that I would describe as a Metroidvania. See, I told you I'd use this term again after the last video. Progression is very similar to one, where you get more items and upgrades as you go. However, whereas a Metroid game would have you usually get more suit upgrades and movement abilities, a majority of the items in Cave Story are actually weapons with little to no mobility upgrade, which may sound terrible, but the game is built around this quite well. The first half of the game is kind of linear, with Quote going to a teleporter and then going to a location, completing a task, and then repeating it. It's kind of like choosing a stage in a video game at first. This has changed right around the time when it starts to feel repetitive, which is good. In terms of control, the game also feels nice with the player character. The movement is pretty floaty, but in my opinion, I think this is fine. Floaty controls can work, especially in this type of game. You can aim in 4 directions, those being up, down, left, and right. Not being able to aim diagonally does suck, but I've never really faced a big issue due to this, but I won't deny that it is limited. But what isn't limited are the guns. Most of the upgrades you get in this game are weapons, which give you more options on how to deal with the enemies. A good example of this is how, when you get to the bushland, the Polar Star is hard to use against the enemies due to the bumpy terrain. Shortly after retrieving a key for this guy, known as Santa. No, wrong Santa. He gives you the fireball, which helps kill the enemies better because of the trajectory. The way guns work are pretty fun, as they can level up 3 times. With each upgrade, they get stronger. However, you can't be too reckless because the weapon can also level down just as easily, if not easier. This creates a good balance where you cannot be careless, and you have to try your best not to get hit as much as possible. There are many weapons in Cave Story. There are a lot, so I'm going to list each one and what it does. The Polar Star is the first gun in the game, and it's the most standard one. It shoots like a projectile weapon. When it's fully upgraded, then it shoots out a slightly larger one. Shortly after this in Egg Corridor, which is not a classic Sonic Zone, you can receive the rocket launcher, which is very powerful. I just don't usually use it because I forget I own it. The Fireball is next, which I am convinced is a reference to Super Mario Bros. Because just look at it. It's good for attacking things close to the ground and on sloped terrain. The bubble launcher weapon is also really cool, but it's really hidden as well, and I wouldn't be surprised if you missed it a few times. It's a really powerful weapon that at first seems like a joke, but once you get to level 3, it decimates things. Next is the knife that has the high damage rate, but one hit brings it all the way down to level 1, so it's high risk, high reward. And that would be it for weapons unless you went looking for the rest of them, as the rest of the weapons are available are what I call trade weapons, as you have to go out of your way to give up weapons to receive them. These include the machine gun, which is probably the best out of these. At level 3 you can fly and jump. Like look, it's like a jetpack, see, watch. Then you have the Spur, which is the finished version of the Polar Star, and as such you have to give up the Polar Star for these. Although I don't know if it's fair to call this a trade weapon, as the Spur can do this. The Nemesis flips the script on the weapon system. Instead of being the strongest at the 3rd level, it's the strongest at level 1. So you have to keep it at a low level. The price is the blade, which you might think like the others, it's a one-way trade. But no, you can actually get the blade back. It's really odd. It's the only weapon trade that can be reversed. Now I have to talk about one trade and highlight it due to how weird it is. The snake is a weapon that I didn't even know existed until like 2014. But what about the weapon itself? Well, the snake is a trade weapon that actually costs 2 weapons, the Polar Star and the Fireball. The weapon is very similar to the Wave Beam from Metroid on the NES, meaning it bobs up and down and it goes through walls. It's not really worth trading the Polar Star, however. It's not worth giving up the Spur. However, I do think it's fun to use in the challenge run, which is something I did once. I want to speak more about the whole branch and paths because it's really interesting to me, so we're going to get to that right now. Upon King's death, Quote gets the blade, and then gets into the worst level in Sonic the Hedgehog. The story and optional paths branch out from here. Like in terms of story, in the Labyrinth Zone you need to do several specific things to succeed in getting the best ending. For example, Curly also has ended up in Labyrinth Zone, and after getting the miracle cure and giving it to her, you reach the first branch of the story. Professor Booster falls and you have to ignore him and carry on. If you do the apparent option and decide to go and check if he's okay, he just dies, and the best ending is lost forever. Because it also, for some reason, keeps an item called the tow rope from spawning, and without the tow rope, you have no means to save Curly Brace when she drowns after the boss fight against the core. I do like the idea of branching paths in the video game, however, this feels too cryptic, especially when you go in the waterway and have to do this oddly complicated series of events to drain the water out of her, and if you don't, the best ending is lost forever. Like, this is some type of stuff that I don't even think you would figure out on, like, multiple playthroughs. Like, this crap would get, like, really, really tiring if the internet didn't exist. Oh, and you thought after doing all that, you'd have the best ending? Haha, no. You finally need to go and talk to Curly in the plantation after she washes up. And then you have to go and find a mushroom to give to her, which leads to a boss fight. Only then can you get the best ending. I love the Praise Cave story for the branching paths, and to me, it's second nature to do all of these things since I've played the game my whole life. However, in reality, it's overly cryptic and you would never figure this out without a guide, even on multiple playthroughs. However, I want to compliment some really fun hidden side quests that this game does have. As I mentioned before, there are a lot of trade weapons. The machine gun doesn't have much to it because you can trade the Polar Star for it as soon as you fight Curly Brace. The Snake is a really interesting gun because you have to go out of your way and talk to this random guy in the Labyrinth Zone shop. It costs the Polar Star and Fireball, and like I said before, it's not worth it, but it is interesting. It's very out of the way. Just like the Nemesis. The Nemesis is a weird case, because after you reach the plantation, you can go backtrack to the graveyard and find a tiny man. And then once you return him to his house, if you return him to his house, you are able to trade the Nemesis for the blade. Now, a fun secret is how you can return to the place where you stole the Polar Star at the beginning of the game and get it upgraded to the Spur. This is easily the strongest weapon in the game, as I have previously mentioned. But what I did not mention is that after you retrieve the Spur, you can return to the Labyrinth Zone and get a special item if you have the Spur. Alternatively, if you do this, but when you have the machine gun, you can receive the turbocharge, which speeds up the ammo recharge speed, which is very useful to the machine gun and bubble gun. While we're on the topic of Labyrinth Zone, you can find the arms barrier, which halves the amount of weapon XP that you lose after being hurt. This isn't even going into the amount of optional, no-use items that you can get in Cave Story that I won't go over. So once Quote and Curly Brace defeat the core, they are washed back to the Mamiga village, where all of the Mamiga have disappeared. There's a really eerie song playing too. The doctor has come and taken or recruited the Mamiga in the village. So now you have to go back through the egg corridor to reach the final stretch of the game. From here, we have a few endings, but to reach any of them you must go through the destroyed egg corridor, which is a stage concept I love. I like it when a game makes you go back through a previous area or level with a dark spin on it, including a dark remix of the level's original theme. At the end of the area, you can either flee the island and get the first ending, which is the worst ending, or you can continue climbing the side of the floating island and continue your way to the plantation, where the doctor is growing the red flowers. This is the last chance the player has to go back and continue any side quests that you may have left, because once you move to the final cave, it'll be very hard to backtrack and finish anything. In other words, after the plantation, you are officially in the end game. And the last cave is not something you want to have to go back through backwards, let me tell you that. But I want to highlight that if you are on the track for the best ending, Last Cave is instead called Last Cave Hidden, and is almost like a Kaizo level in terms of difficulty spikes. Oh my god, we have not even reached the biggest difficulty spike. Once you finish either of these rooms, you reach the balcony, which is the final area, but it's just all hallway with a lot of tough enemies, including throwing the first boss of the game here, which I always found odd. At the end of the game, you have to fight 3 different bosses, starting with a showdown with Misery, which isn't nearly as hard as long as you know what to do, then 2 boss fights, which are against the Doctor and the zombified Court. After you do this, the floating island starts falling, and running to the helicopter gives you the second ending, which is the neutral ending. But the Demon Crown curse is not broken, and Misery and Balrog are still stuck in service to whoever wears it. However, If you have completed all of the required tasks to get the best ending, the house right before the helicopter is now unlocked and you can go inside of the cabin, where a huge chasm is now formed. There is one more save point here, and if you save, there's no going back, ever. Once you jump into the hole, you'll enter the final trial of the game, the Bloodstains Sanctuary, which the game informs you is also hell. Well, here we are the final part of the game, and I sure hope you are ready, because this is by far the hardest part of the game. It's a difficulty spike you will definitely be stabbed upon. If you didn't think the last cave was a Kaizo stage, well, the Bloodstains Sanctuary definitely is. The first part has a lot of precise movement with the Booster 2.0, and a tense part with falling rocks, which deal a lot of damage if they hit you. At the end of the first room, you find Curly. When you pick her up, then you pick her up with a tow cable and carry her on your back, because the Sanctuary is one of the hardest, if not the hardest last area in a Metroidvania I have played. There is so much crap you have to deal with. The enemies hurt so badly it is not even funny. There are a ton of strategies for this area, but one that I personally use is to clear out all of the enemies up until the first boss in this area, because yes, there are 3. Then go back and collect all of the bosses and hope to God that you have enough health. Oh yeah. Remember I said first boss, because this area has a grand total of 4. Giant Press and Balos. 3 different boss fights with Balos, actually. I haven't really talked about him, but during the Sanctuary run, the players let on about the legend of Balos, the man who created the Demon Crown. Balos lived at the same time a king was ruling over the land. Balos possessed magical powers and used this gift for the benefit of the people. He became more popular than even the king. The king became jealous and imprisoned Balos, and proceeded to brutally torture him, to the point where he used his magic to go on a rampage. Consumed by his own hatred and anger, Balos reduced the kingdom, along with his wife and child, to ashes. Jinga saw her brother's actions and eventually exiled him to the floating island, unable to kill her own brother, where Balos created the Demon Crown, by being forced by Misery. Balos would then secretly curse Misery and Balog to be bound to the crown. When you reach Balos' chamber, he greets the player, telling them that he would like them to kill him, and that if they cannot kill him, that they would end up being killed by him. This is where the boss fight starts. The first phase isn't too hard, to be honest. It's just being fast on your feet. Thankfully, if you don't have the rocket launcher missiles anymore, then Curly having the Nemesis is a fairly good way to deal damage to him. After beating this phase, he goes up and turns into the moon from Majora's Mask. In easy mode, you could easily farm EXP and hearts up here, but I recommend that you try and be fast here if you are in normal or hard mode especially. Use the spur or the machine gun to damage his eye by standing where his ear is. If you have the snake, then yeah, good luck. After this phase, you have one more phase, which depending on what you have here will either be easy or really hard. Basically, you jump into his eye and you shoot it with the rocket launcher or the Nemesis that Curly has. If you are fast enough, you'll be fine. After this, the true ending plays, and when I was younger, this was such an amazing feeling after overcoming this hard as hell task. But the game is over, and not only did the others escape, but Balrog and Misery are now freed from the Demon Crown, and Quote and Curly go off somewhere with them that you will never know, because there will never be a sequel. So that's it, right? The true ending surely has to be the last part of the game, right? So, you've beaten the game, but maybe you just want to stick around a bit and experience some more, right? Well, luckily, this game has a ton of extras you can go for, but you'll have to unlock them first. I'll go down the list. Costumes. The costumes are something I really wish weren't restricted to the second player. Like, why can't player 1, who's a silent protagonist, utilize these? I will never understand this, because there are so many awesome costumes that you could use, so many different characters that you could play as from the main game, but you're never able to because of the arbitrary rule. I think it'd provide a lot of replay value, since I will replay the same game over with different cosmetics. I am that shallow. Besides that, we also have the weapon challenges. On the least interesting end, we have the Bloodstains Sanctuary speedrun mode, which is just completing the Sanctuary with your choice of weapons and items, but it's good for practicing, but not much else in my opinion. We have the challenge that's unlocked from the start, the machine gun challenge, which is pretty fun. You just blast and dash through this egg corridor theme level. It's pretty fun, although it's definitely short. The sand pit is quite an interesting one, as it's a sand zone themed stage with hilly terrain. Basically, the idea behind it is going down a deep sand pit with the fireball and then losing access to and climbing back out with the blade. Surprisingly, this makes it a lot harder despite having a stronger weapon, due to the fireball making the climb down much easier. It's a very fun idea and a fun stage, although it's really challenging. I'm very slow when it comes to these, so my times are bad. The Nemesis challenge is next. It's really fun and themed after the outside of the island area. You start this area with the Booster 1.0 and the Nemesis. It's just a series of challenging tasks. When you near the end, you get the Booster 2.0, which kind of makes it a lot easier once you have that. Wind Fortress is the last stage-like area in this game, and it's very interesting. This time the stage is themed after the balcony area, but it's used in a way that makes it seem very unique. Basically, the stage is a test in how good you are at throttling the Booster 2.0. It's very difficult, and you are more likely to die from falling to the abyss below than you are to die from an enemy. The unique track here is really good, too. The ending of the stage is really funny. I won't dare spoil what happens. I suggest that you find it out yourself. But it does go off with a unique boss fight specific to this mode. The boss rush is this huge stage with areas themed around the core. Each door leading to the boss that you have to fight. You get life capsules and weapon EXP as well as the weapons and items as you go through. So it's fun. All weapon trades are available here as well. It's almost like playing through a miniature version of the game. It's like as if you were playing like a Cuphead version of Cave Story where you only fight the bosses. You can be as ill-equipped or as well-equipped as you'd like. It's really fun take on the boss rush. And finally, I would love to talk about Curly Story. Curly Story is the last extra available as of the Nintendo Switch release, and it's really fun. It's the main story, but they swap Quote and Curly Brace's roles, making her the playable character, and what's more is that they don't just add her in and leave it unchanged, but she actually talks and responds to other characters. It's a great example of a Metroidvania with a second playable character, and I cannot be happier. Besides the change of character, the game's basically the same, but what's really interesting is that when you complete the memory restoration on Quote in the True Ending path, he actually starts talking and stops being silent. That was not something I expected, to be honest, and it's weird. But with that said, that is every extra in Cave Story Plus on the Nintendo Switch, and now I think I'll move on to the last section. Cave Story is a really fun game that I believe everyone should try. It's the first breakout indie hit, and the fact that the guy who made it made it all by himself is extremely inspiring as a guy who makes dumb projects in RPG Maker. The game is old, but it's aged really well, and I would say go and try it. If you don't want to drop $30 on the Plus version, that's completely fine, but I think everybody should give the original freeware version, which is still on the internet to this day, a shot. It won't come with all the extra modes and stuff, however, you can install mods on that version, so it might be more worth it. So go on, if you haven't tried it yet, it'll make a really nice weekend or afternoon to beat. You've got nothing to lose by trying it. This has been a Snake Solid video, and I am heading out.